Good evening, friends, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the PCS National Black Members Committee. Proud to present our Holocaust Memorial Day event 2026. We're live across PCS social media accounts. We're on Facebook, YouTube and X, which used to be known as Twitter. Holocaust Memorial Day marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and Birkenau. It was the largest Nazi concentration camp complex, and it's also the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia. Now, 80 years on from the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, anti-Semitism, anti-Jew hatred has increased significantly here in the UK and around the world. We saw evil in Manchester at the synagogue attack, and only during Christmas holidays did we see the horrific scenes of Bondi Beach. Islamophobia is also on the rise. Political rhetoric that is used by politicians and the media to demonize Muslims is commonplace on social media and by certain politicians. Now, members across the country are feeling scared. They're reporting that minority communities are feeling vulnerable, and there's hostility and suspicion of others rising. Now, PCS Union wants to use Holocaust Memorial Day 2026 as an opportunity for us to show that we will never forget. Hear the powerful testimony of the survivors, but also the children of survivors. And we hope that you benefit from this session. We've got a powerful line of speakers, and if you want to share your comments or questions, you can post it and they will get to me and we'll announce them. And acts of solidarity and support is also very, very important. Now, the theme of Holocaust Memorial Day 2026 is Bridging Generation. It's a call to action, a reminder that responsibility of remembrance doesn't end with just the survivors. It lives on through their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, but actually, more importantly, through us, people who hear this powerful testimony and are moved by it. And the theme encourages to actively engage with the past, to listen, to learn, to reflect, and to carry those lessons forward. And by doing that, we build a bridge between memory of those who are the survivors or the children of survivors and action today, between history and hope for the future. And obviously, as the years go by, with 80th anniversary of the Auschwitz liberation, many of those survivors are sadly coming to the end of their life and have sadly passed away. So it's even more important that we amplify this voice. PCS is proud to be an anti-racist organization, a trade union that doesn't just stand up for racism for some members of our community. We're consistently anti-racist. Under the leadership of our national president, Martin Kavanagh, that is manifested itself in support that we have, whether it's Holocaust Memorial Day, whether it's Islamophobia Awareness Month or Black History Month. We're at the front line on picket lines, on protest and rallies around the world, taking on the narrative of the far right, but more importantly, being very clear that as we come together tonight to remember those victims of the Holocaust, particularly the 6 million Jews that have been killed. And it's really important that for us of a different generation compared to those who lived through World War II, that we learn from these stories and we say never again. And genocide doesn't discriminate by age. It doesn't discriminate against color. There are so many people who are affected. If you look at the Bosnian genocide that we're commemorating 30 years on, you can see that evident. After World War II, we thought we had said never again in Europe, but sadly we saw that again in Bosnia. Honor and life is very important. Life is sacred, and PCS, as always, is very important to fight for the causes that we fight for, but also being clear about our values and direction of travel. So we welcome you all. Please do send your questions, but more importantly, your words of encouragement and solidarity to us, and we'll read some of them out throughout the evening. I just want to introduce our very first speaker. He's the national president of PCS. He's a great ally of our movement, a great leader. I'm really honoured to have him, Martin Kavanagh. Martin, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Mohammed, and good evening, everybody. And can I start off by thanking Mohammed and the PCS National Black Members Committee for not only putting on this live event tonight to commemorate such an important event as Holocaust Memorial Day, but also for inviting me as the National President of PCS to speak and address this live event for the second year. Obviously, the 27th of January every year is an important date in the calendar, an important date in the equality calendar. And it is there absolutely to mark a commemoration of the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. We know, comrades, don't we, from historical fact, that over 1.1 million people were exterminated in that terrible, terrible time. Nearly 1 million of those were Jews. The Nazi Holocaust, as Mohammed just said, in total killed nigh on 6 million Jews, around 2/3 of the entire Jewish population of Europe at that time. But in addition, there were thousands of others who were slaughtered. Thousands of Romani people, disabled people, trade unionists, many in the LGBT+ community, and of course, prisoners of war were also murdered in those camps. And comrades, we all know from the lessons of that terrible, terrible period in history that one of the key themes of that time has been to learn the lesson of never again. But sadly, whether we're talking about from Cambodia to Rwanda or from Darfur through to Gaza, history has shown us that time and time and time again, we haven't learnt those lessons, and genocide has happened again and again. And we also know, comrades, don't we, that it always starts the same way. It starts with the demonization of a group of people, the denial of them of their rights to exist and to have decent lives. And it starts with the demonization of those people. In fact, demonization is always brought about by the start of dehumanization. And as that inhumanity gets grip, we also have understood that that wasn't just in Nazi Germany, as I said earlier. That was a cancer during a historical period that spread throughout Europe and indeed across the world. In 1934, just in this country, the Daily Mail was absolutely clear in its headlines of hurrah for the black shirts, praising not only the Nazis and the Nazi regime, but backing Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists. We also know from the historic battle in Cable Street in 1936, when the Jewish community, trade unionists and communists joined forces to prevent Mosley's fascists marching through a Jewish area of London, that we know that when we come together and when we organise to send a clear message, it can be inspiring. And that's an event that we as a trade union, PCS, will be commemorating later this year on the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street. But comrades, in addition to us knowing that when we unite against these terrible, terrible oppressions, we also understand that despite our best efforts, the establishment in country after country always backs those who seek to divide our communities. So in the 30s, it wasn't just Mosley and the fascists, it was mainstream media and indeed the government of the day absolutely refusing point blank to take Jewish refugees who were trying to flee persecution from the Nazis. And again, the Daily Mail in 1938, 2 years after that Battle of Cable Street, and 4 years after its initial disgraceful and despicable headlines, were telling everyone who will listen that there were German Jews pouring into this country, describing them as aliens and entering this country through the back door. Now, doesn't that sound, sadly, all too familiar, even in this day and age? With the far right in power or on the rise throughout many countries of the world today as well, we need strong trade unions, and we know that the agenda of the trade union movement is more important now than it has ever been. You don't need to take my word for that or the word of PCS, but you absolutely can see it every single day through your television screens, through your social media channels. And it is why PCS is really proud that we take a strong stand against any attempt to divide people in our communities and any attempt to divide people in our movement. We absolutely reject all those who seek to whip up hatred and to seek create division. And we are proudly anti-racist and we are proudly anti-fascist as part of that wider movement. And it is why earlier this year at our National Union Conference, we overwhelmingly endorsed a motion to review our anti-racist, anti-fascist strategy, which seeks to embed in our workplaces and amongst our membership education programme and the arguments to reject those despicable views of the far right. We know the trade unions standing together alongside our communities is absolutely vital in the here and the now. The slogans of our movements, historical slogans of our movements, are ones that we've all heard before. An injury to one is an injury to all. United we stand, divided we fall. And unity is strength. But for us, they can't just be slogans. They have got to be absolutely soundboards for everything that we believe in and everything that we fight for. We have seen in the past how trade unions themselves have been demonised and trade unionists have been demonised. In the 1980s, Thatcher describing the trade unions of the day as the enemy within. The enemy within is also how Hitler labelled the Jews in Nazi Germany back in the 20s and 30s. And last year, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, talked about using the US military to tackle the enemy within. The same soundbite, the same rhetoric, whether it's Thatcher, whether it's the Nazis, whether it's Trump. And that is why we know we absolutely have to shout from the rooftops that is not happening on our watch. So our solidarity, comrades, absolutely has and should and always will extend beyond the commemoration of the slaughter of the Jewish population in 1930s Nazi Germany. It absolutely extends to the streets of Minneapolis right here, right now. It absolutely extends to the rubble and the devastation that we witness in Gaza City and to all people who are facing persecution and oppression around the world. Because if history teaches us one thing, it's this: that if you and we allow one group to be oppressed, then we are next. No matter what group we belong to, no matter how we identify ourselves, we will be next. So, comrades, we also know that what defeats fascism, what defeats racism, what defeats Islamophobia and every other form of bigotry is solidarity and is courage. Our movement has shown that time and time again over the generations. And that's why, as trade unionists, it is vital that we stay united. And why, as trade unionists, it's vital that in the next few weeks we come together in a large demonstration such as that taking place at the end of March in London to send a clear and unequivocal message that we will not stay silent and watch our communities and our streets be overtaken by the far right and those who seek to whip up hatred. So, comrades, I will finish with this. While it is absolutely right and proper that here tonight and earlier this week we were remembering the Holocaust, it is also absolutely right that we remember all genocides and we learn those lessons from history. If we don't learn those lessons, if we don't stay united, if we don't stay strong, then we will make the mistake of previous generations in allowing these atrocities to come back and be repeated time and time again. PCS absolutely will play our part alongside others in ensuring that is not the future that we have for our children, our grandchildren, and our future generations. And it is not what we want and will accept in the here and in the now. We will learn lessons from those histories. We will seek to try and educate and improve the lives of our members and all those in our communities, as well as protecting the vital public services that our members provide. Well, thank you so much for joining this absolutely vitally important event tonight. Thank you for taking the time to listen and giving up your time, and solidarity to everyone.
Thank you so much, Martin Kavanagh, our national president. I know you're very busy, so we're very, very grateful for joining us tonight. I just wanted to share a few lines from the last testament of David Grabber. And he said, "I want no thanks. For me, it is enough if future generation remember our times, and if our suffering and our pains are mentioned. And also that in this time of decline, people were found who had the courage of such work." And he said, "May we now die in peace. We fulfilled our mission. May history attest for us." And that's really important because he was and that was on the 3rd of August, 1942, and he was killed. So it's really important that we never forget. Let's move on to our next speaker. Really privileged to have Helen Gordon. She's the child of a Holocaust survivor. She's a member of the 45 AIDS Society, which is a fantastic charity doing some amazing work. Helen, thank you so much for joining us, and we're very honored to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I feel privileged to have this opportunity to share my father's story, and thank you both Mohammed and Martin for some very powerful words for all of us to reflect and the work that you're doing. As I said, thank you for letting me share my father's story. This year, it feels especially fitting as the Holocaust theme is Holocaust Memorial Day. Which is Bridging Generations. I have got a presentation, thank you, Bridging Generations. As Holocaust survivors are now very few in number, this theme reminds us that the responsibility of remembrance does not end with them. It lives on through their children and grandchildren and through all of us. Bridging Generations encourages us to engage actively with the past and listen to learn and carry those lessons forward. I'm sharing with you my story that my dad used to give to me in bite-sized pieces throughout the years. He especially would tell me stories at times, family times, for example, on Jewish festivals like Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, when it would bring back his family memories of when he was with his parents and his brothers. So what is coming today and what I'm going to share comes from those memories and his written and recorded testimonies. Next slide. My father was born as Motek Grzmot in Sosnowiec in Poland in 1926. The first picture is of when he was recovering in the 1940s, and the second picture is with my father. He died in 2009. Next slide. This is a picture of his family. It's his last picture that he had, which was taken just before the war. As news was spreading, they didn't know exactly what was coming. So the family sensed there was something wrong and were having pictures taken together to ensure that family units were recorded. If you look carefully, you can see a fold in the photograph, as this picture was kept carefully by a distant relative, folded up for many years and sent to my father after the war. Dad was the oldest of 3 brothers, Zelik and Benik. He wasn't very tall, but in this picture, he looks tall because, as he used to remember to me, he stood on a box for the picture. My father had a very large family. His father, Kalmar, was one of 3 siblings, and his mother, Zlata, was one of 13. His father was a shoemaker and would make shoes to order as they did in those days. His mother, Zlata, was a saleswoman, and she would go out and find sales for his father to sell. They were a very modern religious family and kept the Sabbath on a Saturday. If you look at the photo, you can see a family unit, but it's not a happy picture of a family. If you look at their faces, you can see the sadness and the worry of what was laying ahead for them. Next slide. To give some context to the location where my father and his family lived, he was born in Sosnowiec, which was the west of Poland. 26,000 Jews lived there before the war. Many Jewish families moved there because of the mining industry, which offered work and opportunity. The first Jewish cemetery opened in 1894, and by the time war began, there were a well-established and thriving Jewish community. It is also important to note the town's location in the south of Poland, because this becomes an important part of my dad's story and the journey the family took. Next slide. This is my father's home in Sosnowiec. This picture was taken in the 1980s, shortly before it was pulled down by one of his friends. He lived in a block of flats alongside many of his mother's relatives. Ironically, he lived in number 13. It was a poor area, but my father always said that his family would consider it as comfortable, as both of his parents worked and they had other things. They had many things. They had many things which included owning their own flat. His parents had moved there from a small nearby village because it was a bigger town and there was more work and opportunity to earn money. Many of his mother's family lived in the block and family life was closely connected. The flat itself was very small, just 2 rooms. His parents slept in a double bed and the boys shared the other bed. They didn't have an oven, so every Friday his mother would prepare a casserole called schulant and take it to the local bakery to put in the corner of their big ovens where it would cook slowly overnight. On the Sabbath, she would go back to collect it, and that's what the family would eat for their Shabbat meal. Next slide, please. Life leading up to the war. In many ways, his childhood felt normal. Dad used to say how bitterly cold the winters were and how he would ice skate to school across the lakes. He played with his friends. He belonged to a Jewish youth movement, a bit like Scouts. And in the summer of 1939, he went on a summer camp for the first time. He remembers, and he often spoke to me about the campfires, singing songs and long walks and feeling free. Little did he know what lay ahead, because things began to change. One day, he saw some of his non-Jewish friends knock a religious Jewish boy off his bicycle. He tried to stop them and asked them, "Why are you doing this?" They told him because he was Jewish. And my dad said, "Well, I'm Jewish too." He replied, "You're not like him." This was because my dad had fair hair and did not wear Jewish clothes, religious clothes. So at that point, they did not identify him as Jewish. Dad ran home and told his mother what had happened. She explained times were changing. Another time, the caretaker of the flats, a man they considered a friend, went away for a while. When he returned, he was different. His mother was pouring some water down the drains, something that everybody did in the block. The caretaker suddenly attacked her. He shouted at her, called her a bloody Jew. Dad remembered her coming home, red-faced, very shaken. A look he'd never seen before. There were other moments too when he felt anti-Semitism. An occasion when his friends tried to get him to do the Nazi salute. And when he asked why, they said, "You'll know soon enough." Anti-Semitism was truly taking its grip. Then came the Nuremberg laws, a growing set of restrictions that stripped Jewish people of everyday life. It included no radios, curfews, pets forbidden, and all Jewish people needed to wear yellow stars. School became a place of fear. Jewish children were segregated. Some teachers spat at them, some hit them, and because teachers were seen as role models, what did the other non-Jewish children do? They copied them. Dad said life had become hard and dangerous. As tension grew and the news became more frightening, Dad remembered his parents saying they were going on a picnic to visit a family in a small nearby village. He remembered it was a lovely day, all being together, not worrying about work, feeling like a family again. However, on the journey, his parents explained the truth. They were hoped to stay with a family in a small village they would believe to be safer. However, when they arrived, they could see the village had already been surrounded by German forces. With no other choice, they huddled together and hid overnight in a barn and then returned home in the morning. At that time, they believed the Germans were only taking men. So my dad's father went into hiding for 3 months. While he was away, the Nuremberg laws increased. Synagogues were burned down, Jewish shops were closed, and Jews were forbidden from doing business of any kind. For adults, simply surviving became dangerous. So children went to allotments to dig for potatoes and turnips because adults risk being beaten just for being on the streets. Children as young as 10 or 11 had to be streetwise. Food could only be bought from the town hall between certain hours, and people queued for hours. To earn money for food, Dad tried to sell shoes on the street. He carried just one shoe at a time. When someone agreed to buy it, he had the money in his hand. He would go back home and fetch the other shoe. He sold anything he could get his hands on, even sugar sachets. He did whatever he needed to do to eat. He also remembered how he was standing in the bread queue when someone accused him of stepping out of line. For that, he was beaten by the guards. Next slide, please. Then in 1942, deportation started from Sosnovich. In August, notes were posted everywhere, letting them know they were being evacuated and taking all their belongings with them. My father was preparing for his bar mitzvah, which is a coming of age in the Jewish religion, when the Nazis arrived on the 6th of September. They were rounded up and taken to the ghetto near Sosnovich. Dad explained it was like moving the whole of Oxford Street into Wembley Stadium. There were thousands of people. It was bedlam, children and adults crying, squeezing large families into single rooms, poor sanitary conditions and lack of resources. As they were being moved into the ghetto, women and children were being separated to a temporary holding at a school before being transported to Auschwitz. When my father and his dad realised that his mother and youngest brother Bennett were being separated from them, they protested, and said it wasn't allowed. However, for that, both my dad and his father were beaten. Dad later said he was so badly beaten, he never understood how he survived, how he didn't break bones or die. Despite everything, Dad managed to visit his mother and youngest brother Bennett every day, bringing them bread and blankets through a hole in the fence. When he saw his mum, he knew something had changed. The strength in her face was gone, replaced by worry and resignation of the fate that lay ahead. Dad said they didn't discuss what was going to happen. It was clear they both knew. When word spread they were about to be moved, Dad went to the hole in the fence and begged her and Bennett to escape. He pointed if they escaped and crawled through, they would have a chance. But in that moment, his mum knew that she had to act courageous. She encouraged her youngest son to go through with my dad. But Bennett, being only 6 years old, what did he do? He held on to his mum. He refused to let go. Time was limited. There wasn't time for arguing. She didn't fight him. She simply said to my dad, "Go, Motek, go and save yourself." These words were recollected many times as his mum's last words to him. Dad even tried to see the train before it left the next morning. He tried to say goodbye, but a Gestapo member shot at him, which just missed his head and hit the brickwork next to him. Dad then continued to live in the ghetto with his father and middle brother Zelik. Next slide, please. This is the list from the Polish archives of the families that lived in my dad's block of flats. It's a copy I'd managed to obtain years later, and you can see there's only 3 of his family listed and other of his family names that are there. Sadly, his mother and his youngest brother were never officially registered going into the ghetto. They simply disappeared from life. Life in the ghetto was brutal, cramped, hungry, and unsanitary. One day, my dad's brother Zelik disappeared. For years, Dad hoped he'd escaped. But in 1979, he received a letter from a person from the same town telling him that Zelik had been shot at the fence while trying to bring food into the camp. That's the only time I remember my father crying, as he'd hoped his brother had somehow survived, because he never let what had happened to him interfere with his life. Roundups continued to take people to Auschwitz were frequent. During one of them, my dad and his father hid overnight in an empty house belonging to a well-known musician. At other times, Dad hid in cupboards, inside chests, anywhere he could fit. He also told me that Nazi soldiers treated it like a game. Jews escaped into the forest were hunted down and brought back, only to be sent to their deaths for trying to run. His father was taken away in early 1943. However, just before Pesach, he actually received a letter for him, and Dad remembered how he was so happy to receive this parcel of food and a letter. In the parcel, there was palaver cake, matzah and cheese, and his father was saying he was well and had food. We later learned that these letters were forced, meant to give families false hope and lure people out of hiding. Shortly after writing that letter, his father was sent to the gas chamber. My dad stayed in the ghetto a little longer until he was also rounded up and sent to Auschwitz. Next slide, please. This is the map of the extermination camps within Poland. His mother Zlata and youngest brother Benik perished in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the nearest camp to their home, as I indicated earlier in the earlier map, as it was close to them. Next slide, please. This is the entrance to Auschwitz I. Originally, it consisted of 21 pre-war brick barracks. By the peak of 1944, Auschwitz had grown to cover 40 square kilometres and accounted for more than 25% of all people imprisoned across the entire concentration camp system. The sign above the gates reads "Arbeit macht frei," which translates in German to English as "work sets you free." If you look closely at the letter B in the alphabet, you can see it's upside down. It is widely believed that the Jewish prisoners who were forced to make the sign did this deliberately. A small, quiet act of resilience, a way of showing that things were not as they appeared, a warning sign that inside was not quite right. Auschwitz was part of a larger system. Alongside the main camps, there were around 45 satellite camps spread across the region, where prisoners were used for forced labour. The nearest to Auschwitz was Auschwitz I, the original camp and administration centre. This is what you can see in the picture. Auschwitz II, which was Birkenau, the main extermination camp, and Auschwitz III, Monowitz, a labour camp, which included Blechhammer. Next slide, please. If you look in the pictures, the one on the right is one of the pictures that I took when I visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, which, as I said, is the largest extermination camps. You can see that transports arrived on this train station every single day from almost every Nazi-occupied country in Europe. And this is where Dad was taken. He often spoke about the selection process and how brutal it was. When people arrived, women and children were sent to one side. Men who looked fit enough to work were sent to the other. He also said you could also see the smoke billowing out from the crematorium chimneys. If you look at the arrows, you can faintly see in the background where the chimneys stood. Those chimneys, he said, were burning day and night, 24 hours a day. That smoke never stopped. Dad made himself useful. He was told to say he had a trade, so he said he was a plumber. He was quite big and stocky for his age, and looked older than he was. Because of that, he was selected to work. Being chosen to work meant survival, at least for the moment. Next slide, please. The document you see here is the original entry record which was kept at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It records his moment of his arrival at Auschwitz. From that moment on, he lost his name. He became prisoner 184683. And you can see it tattooed on his arm. He's sitting there with my mum and my youngest son. At the bottom of the document, there is a line that says he'd been warned that if any of the information he gave was untrue, he would be punished for what the Nazis called intellectual forgery. And you can see he'd written that his occupation was a plumber. At just 17 years old, he understood something very clearly. He needed to make himself useful. And skilled prisoners were treated differently. Those who could work in manufacturing or trades sometimes received better clothing, slightly more food, and better chances of survival. My dad was lucky. He also knew some of those skilled prisoners, and they helped him when they could, sometimes giving him extra food. He spent about a year doing hard labour in Blackhammer, a satellite camp of Auschwitz, digging limestone and loading trolleys for the railways. It was challenging, tough work, cold, filthy, and relentless. Dad would reflect how he couldn't stop for a moment, because if he stopped, it would mean he'd be beaten or shot. Next slide, please. These are some pictures from inside Auschwitz that Dad would recall to me of his life inside living in the camp. He would say roll calls were held constantly from as early as 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. Prisoners were forced to stand completely motionless, often for hours between electric fences, and you can see holding each other up as well. Dad told me about a dentist he befriended, and during roll calls, the dentist would hide him in a cupboard, stopping him from being randomly selected and shot. Sometimes survival came to moments like that. During this time, food was scarce. At midnight, a blow on a pot with a spade meant it was time for soup. A single loaf of bread would be shared between 6 men. However, Dad didn't rush to be first to get the soup. He learned to wait until later in the line. And this, as he told me, was because the vegetables would sink to the bottom of the pot, which meant it was more nutritious, and he would therefore be able to have more vitamins from those vegetables at the bottom of the pot. It was small strategies like this that helped him to survive. He said at night it was again brutal. The block commander demanded silence and ordered everyone to sleep. He would often beat prisoners, sometimes simply for his own amusement. In the picture, you can see the living conditions were harsh. Old cattle sheds had been converted into prison accommodation. There was no proper heating and no resources to burn. Prisoners shared 3-tiered bunk beds, tightly packed together. It was common to wake up and discover that someone had died during the night. The body would have to be pulled out from the bunk and left outside. In one of the photographs, you can also see the washing block, which was very crude. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, Dad worked between Heidelberg and Blackhammer. 14 hours days, loading lime into wagons. Anyone who dared to stop, even for a moment, was beaten with rifles. If someone stopped 3 times, they were shot. Roll calls were constant. From 4 a.m. till 9 p.m, prisoners were forced to stand motionless in the cold, and if you couldn't stand, you were killed. Many of those chose to end their own lives, and Dad spoke about a man he used to talk to and who supplied hay. He was only probably around 40 years old, but Dad said he looked like an old man, and one day he watched him throw himself onto the electric fence. During that time, he learned not to trust anyone and just to focus on himself and keep himself to himself. He developed painful boils on his hands and neck from malnutrition, but he covered them carefully. He knew that if he appeared unwell, that could be the end. A year after back-breaking labour, an announcement was made that they were looking for plumbers. They warned that anyone who claimed to be skilled but wasn't would be killed. As we know, Dad didn't know how to plumb, but he already said that he could. And he also knew that if he stayed digging the railway lines, he would die. So he took a gamble and volunteered. Luck was on his side. He was assigned to a French man who quickly realised the truth, that he couldn't plumb. But instead of reporting him, he taught him the basics, and somehow he continued to survive. He spoke about the religious Jews who were also in the camp, how they prayed and sung during the Jewish festivals, all by memory, to keep their spirits alive. However, he rarely spoke and just focused on surviving one day at a time. Another way he kept himself going was by learning French. And I remember on a holiday to France, Dad taught me "Que l'heure est-il?" was what time was it, and he remembered let me know as he learnt it from the concentration camps, because he used it to pass messages between the prisoners and the guards. They didn't have watches in those times and had to rely on someone passing along the time so they knew when it was time for their breaks. The guards also liked their luxuries, and Dad managed to get hold of cigarettes for them. That small currency often kept them alive a little longer. It was tough. There were frequent American air raids. On 3 occasions, Dad was buried under rubble. Each time he managed to escape, even when petrol tanks were hit nearby. Next slide, please. In 1945, the Russian and Allied forces were advancing, and now everything changing again. On the 21st of January 1945, my dad was sent on a death march from Bleckhammer to Grosswalsen. The march lasted for 3 weeks and covered around 350 kilometres. If they were lucky, they might shelter in a barn for a night, huddling together for warmth. Most of the time, they walked through the snow that came up to the knees. At one point, Dad managed to get hold of a pair of shoes from someone who sadly had died during the walk, but they were far too small. When he finally managed to get them off his feet, his toe came away with the shoe from frostbite. He explained to me how he wrapped up his toes in bandages and had to just keep walking, because he said anyone that was too weak was shot and simply trampled underfoot. And if you helped someone, you would be shot as well. And how overnight, about 50 or more people would die. Food was only given out every 2 to 3 days, 3 potatoes each. Dad spoke about one terrifying night when a Gestapo guard suddenly opened fire. Panic spread and people began to run. Other guards tried to regain control by shooting those who fled. But however, it came clear that the gunfire had started because the guards had frightened each other in the dark. But by then, many people had already died. Around 4,000 people set out on that march. Only a quarter survived to reach Grosswalsen. As the Allies advanced from the west and the Russians from the east, the prisoners were constantly moved east and then south towards Czechoslovakia, Bavaria and Austria. The Nazis were trying to hide their evidence of what they were doing. Dad's journey, as you can see with the arrows, took him from Sosnowiec to Auschwitz, to Grosswalsen, and then to Buchenwald, and finally to Theresienstadt. However, when he got to the end of the death march in Grosswalsen, he collapsed, and he was quite literally dragged the last stretch before he fainted. At first, he felt relief, hoping things might improve when he arrived there. However, the camp was already overcrowded, so new arrivals had to sleep out in the yards. Conditions were even worse than Blackhammer, where he came from. Dad said the people were like walking skeletons, like zombies. Dad found old cement bags to lie on. During the night, it would rain and then dry out, and he would wake up all stiff as covered in hardened cement. There was almost no food. Fights broke out constantly over scraps. People were there from all over Europe, Ukraine, Italy, France, and beyond. He realised something very clearly, that if he stayed there, he would die. And after 4 weeks in Grossrosen, he was rounded up and taken onto an open coal train to Buchenwald. Next slide, please. These are some documents, archived records of my father's journey as he was moved between camps that we have managed to attain. If you look closely, you will see that one of the papers on his notes the occupation as a plumber. You also note that it's given my dad's age is older than his real one. He knew that looking older and stronger and more capable gave him a better chance of surviving the selections, as children were seen as not required, as they were too weak and sent to the gas chambers. These pieces of paper might look ordinary, but they tell a story and document a journey. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, after about 4 weeks at Grossrosen, in March 1945, my father was packed onto a train bound for Buchenwald. This time, the train was made up of open coal wagons, like in the picture. As terrible as it sounds, he felt relieved, as he simply didn't have the strength left to walk. During the journey, he could hear Allied planes overhead. The pilots didn't realise that the train was full of prisoners. They believed it was carrying Nazi forces and began to bomb nearby. At one point, a bomb hit a barn to the tracks and the train stopped. A stronger man jumped down and ran to the barn. Inside the barn was a dead horse killed by the bombing. He cut off the leg with a knife and ran it back towards the train with the guards chasing him. He threw it onto the train and into the wagon where my dad was. My dad was so thin and sick-looking that the prisoners on the train shoved the meat underneath my father, as they felt, because he looked so poorly, they would barely notice him, and so they could hide the meat safely underneath him. The man who retrieved the meat was badly beaten. As the train jolted along, my dad said he almost laughed, as his body bouncing on the meat was tenderizing it. For days, that horse meat kept him and everybody else alive as they ate it raw. During the journey, another prisoner noticed that my dad had a cold filling in his tooth. The man smashed it out with a shoe and used it to trade for food at my dad's expense. Everybody was just trying to keep themselves alive. Eventually, the train reached Buchenwald, where prisoners were treated a bit better than previous Grossrosen. By then, my father was so thin that the guards thought he was a child, and he was sent to the children's barracks. There, for the first time in a long while, someone looked after him. He was given shelter, warmth, and a meal a day. When he heard another train was leaving, after everything he already endured, he couldn't face it. He even considered hiding in the camp. But then he believed that getting on that train might only be the only way out, because he couldn't see any other option. 2 days later, after my dad had left on that train, the Americans had liberated Buchenwald, and he narrowly missed freedom. Instead, he spent another 4 weeks on an open wagon being transported again. There were many Ukrainian prisoners on board, and they were stronger as had come into the war later, and they gathered food, lit small fires, boiled water, and searched for grass or anything edible. Food came at random times, if at all. Dad said he spent the whole time thinking about food. He tried to distract himself by counting how long it had been since he'd seen his parents, but eventually that became impossible. Starvation, exhaustion destroyed his sense of time and thoughts. One day, he managed to eat a lump of salt because it had bits of soup clinging to it. He said it tasted incredible, but it left him desperately thirsty, as salt would. So in the search of water, he threw himself off the wagon. He was so weak that he couldn't climb back on. A guard picked him up and threw him into the wagon reserved for the dead. Anyone who died during the journey was placed there. When the wagon was full, the train would stop and the bodies would be dumped into a pit. At first, my dad didn't mind, as the bodies that were thrown on top of him were still warm. He said he felt like it was a dream state. He knew he was alive, but he couldn't move or speak, and eventually he blacked out. The train continued and reached its destination, Theresienstadt. The Russians had already arrived and liberated the camp, and a Russian soldier who was checking the carriages noticed that my dad's eyes were moving, and he sighed. Realizing he was still alive, he pulled him out from the dead and placed him in a wagon headed for hospital. My dad had no idea that the war was over and he'd been liberated, but somehow, against everything, he was alive. Next slide, please. The first time Dad knew he survived was when a nurse spoke to him in Russian and said, "You will survive." He was surprised himself. He was suffering from typhus, and doctors had told him later that it was a miracle that he hadn't died. The Russian nurses cared for him, and in the hospital in Theresienstadt, they tried to get him to eat and bring him back to life. One day, when he was lying on his hospital bed, he remembered a story back to me one evening. I remember him telling me that the man who risked his life to cut the leg from the dead horse, who had helped to keep them all alive, walked past his window. He was now dressed in a Russian uniform, helping to march the German soldiers out of the camp as prisoners. Years later, when I visited Theresienstadt myself, I learned something else. The death marchers had been heading there deliberately. During the war, Theresienstadt had been used as propaganda to give false impression that Jews were being relocated for better lives. In reality, it was a cover. The plan was to bring the remaining Jews there to be murdered in the crematorium, as it was slightly outside the town, and the remains would be thrown into the stream to get rid of the evidence. Whilst my father was there, he heard that the UK had secured sponsorship and agreed to take 1,000 children who had survived the Holocaust into the UK. By this time, he was 18 years old, but because he looked so thin and emaciated and with no paperwork, he said he was 16, therefore still a child and could be counted and to be taken with many of the boys. They were able to be taken back, were able to travel to the UK. It is also important to note that looking for 1,000 children, that they only ever found 732 children. Next slide, please. My dad was among the first group of sponsored evacuees to arrive in the UK. This photograph shows them just before they left. They were waiting for the RAF bombers, which had been delayed because of the weather. So while they were waiting, they had these pictures taken in Prague. In May 2019, the survivors and their families came together to recreate that same picture in its same place, the same pose, taken more than 70 years later. You can see me, if you look closely, in the pink jacket with my brothers and sister and my son. We stood near, and then there's a second picture where we stood near to where my dad stood 70 odd years later, and my dad is also ringed. He was always talked about standing in the back and standing on tiptoes to be seen in the picture. Next slide, please. This is another photograph which shows my dad in Prague waiting to board the RAF planes with the bring him back to the UK. He's standing next to Harry Ulmer, his lifelong friend and a distant cousin from the same time. town. They survived together, and our families grew up side by side. Sadly, Harry passed away recently, but this picture not just captures a moment in history, but a friendship that lasted a lifetime. Next slide, please. In August 1945, the boys and girls, as they became known, arrived at the Calgarth estate in Windermere, which was an abandoned arms factory. This photograph, you can see my dad wearing the flat cap. He loved the flat cap, walking away back onto British soil from the British RAF bomber. The other document you can see lists the survivors who arrived in Windermere. Next slide, please. Dad slowly began to rebuild his life. He assimilated to life in England. He changed his name to Montague Graham. He learned English and began to think about the future again. In this photograph, it was taken in the Calgarth estate in Windermere. You can see Dad sitting in his bed, looking at the blackboard, learning English. The woman standing with the boys is Marie Paniff, known to the boys as Sister Maria. She cared for them, taught them, and helped to rehabilitate them. Dad always felt deeply indebted to her. He stayed in contact with her until she died, and I remember when I was a little girl, him taking me to regularly visit her and talking about how she was his hero. Dad had hoped to move to Israel, but he was not well enough. TB had badly damaged his chest, and his recovery would take much longer. But this is where he started a new life, and he was very grateful. Next slide, please. This is an image which was taken at the Windermere Cinema, one of the children's very first outings after arriving in Windermere. They were allowed to be children again. They played football, spent time outdoors around Windermere, and slowly began to enjoy freedom. In recent years, the film The Windermere Children recreated scenes from those early days. It showed what life was like for the boys and girls when they arrived in England. And this is Dad loved this time, and this is where his recovery really took place. Next slide, please. Here are some clippings from the local newspapers at the time. Dad always referred to the place as paradise on earth. He loved it. He talked about how they would go out onto the lake and swim in the lake. You can see the platforms that I went back myself to the areas that he stood, where they used to play and fish and find life again. Next slide, please. As Dad became stronger, he applied for and completed an apprenticeship with Adler Typewriters. The owner was a German refugee, understood what Dad had been through, and gave him an opportunity. But it wasn't easy. Dad was about 24 years old, and the other apprentices were only 15. They didn't really understand why he was there, even when he tried to explain. Still, he kept going. He began to live again. He hired motorbikes, started enjoying life and looking forward. But what he wanted most of all was his own family. One of his friends bought a car and suggested a trip to Bournemouth over their August bank holiday weekend. The trip changed everything. It was there he met my mum. They agreed to meet again on the beach the following week, and not long after that, on the 15th of June 1951, they became engaged. After everything he endured, he would start a new chapter. Next slide, please. Monty married Millie in March 1952, and we still have the invitations from their wedding. Next slide, please. Later the same year, in December, they welcomed their first child, Kelvin. He was followed by my sister Lorraine, then David and me. Today, our family has grown to include 4 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. And after everything he lost, my dad focused on his family and rebuilding his life and what he was most proud of. Next slide, please. All the boys and girls who arrived together in England created the 45 Aid Society. For many of them, as I mentioned before, they were the only family they had. They treated themselves as one big family, even though not related. I grew up with many aunties and uncles and cousins. They all had a zest for life and celebrated life together, attending bar and bat mitzvahs, weddings, and every milestone they could. They supported one another and remembered together. In 2017, a giant patchwork quilt was created to remember the 732 boys and girls who survived. Each square tells a story, a life, a journey, a memory. And for those who could not be located, their names were sewn into the quilt instead. In that way, no one's forgotten. The middle square is the square we created for my father, and you can see bits of the story that I've said within that square. Next slide, please. As I've mentioned, there was a film made, The Windermere Children, and a documentary, and it's worth watching to see how these children were looked after and how they responded to rehabilitation and recreating their own lives. And I believe it's still on iPlayer. Next slide, please. If you want further reading, there are also some books available about the Windermere children, including the Marie Peneff book detailing the rehabilitation of the survivors, and Martin Gilbert, The Triumph Over Adversity. Next slide, please. My dad's legacy is his story of survival, the story of an ordinary family from Poland and a remarkable journey of physical and mental strength. His story challenges us to think about equality and diversity and to recognise the impact of our actions have on others. It is an important part of history. And now there are very few survivors left who can recount firsthand what is happening during these tragic times. So it's important for children and grandchildren like myself to retell this story. And this is why education matters. So we learn to think about our choices, to reflect on the consequences of our actions, and to understand how ordinary decisions can shape lives of others. One last thought to leave you with. If we held a minute's silence for each of the 6 million people who lost their life, which includes the 1.5 million children, we would be silent for 11 years. Thank you for listening. Last slide, please. Thank you.
Helen, thank you so much. That was really powerful testimony. And yeah, you're a credit to your late father.
Thank
And
you.
we thank you so much for joining us tonight as well. Yeah, we've got lots of really positive, not many questions coming through, but lots of positive comments and lots of love from everyone in the room.
Thank you.
So that's really, really important. Helen there, really powerful. Okay, we're going to move on now and just introduce our final speaker. Because as I said to you earlier, the Bosnian genocide is 30 years today. That anniversary is 30 years today. And it's important that we remember Srebrenica and the Bosnian War. And often it was said never again after World War II, and then on the soil of Europe in Bosnia, we saw those massacres and ethnic cleansing on an industrial scale. So I'm really honored and privileged that Elmina Kulasic, who's the director of Remembering Srebrenica, she's a survivor of a concentration camp, is joining us live from Bosnia. Elmina, thank you so much for joining us, and great honor to hear your testimony. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Helen, I would like to say thank you for sharing your father's story. He would be very proud, and his story echoed my story. And while listening to you, I was taken back to what I went through and what I will have to tell my children. And I hope that when I'm gone, that my children will have the courage, like you, to share parts of my story so that we can learn the lessons of what a war and a genocide can do to a family, to a child, and how that is not just one story of one family, but a story for all of us. I was only 7 years old. It was actually my 7th birthday on May 24th in 1992 when my hometown of Kazarac was attacked. Instead of celebrating my birthday, we ended up in a concentration camp, the Ternopilje concentration camp. Before the war, the camp was an elementary school called Brotherhood and Unity. So instead of starting my first grade in 92, I ended up in a concentration camp, which was an elementary school. And it changed my life completely. And it ended my childhood. I never had a childhood. And even as an adult now, as a mother, I am creating my memories with my children through their childhood. Your story of the father that told you of starvation and helplessness and fear, it's something that I personally went through. My family and I, we were held in the Ternopily concentration camp only for 5 weeks. But those 5 weeks for me were like a lifetime. We only had water and some boiled grains, and I barely saw any bread or any other food. I heard the screams and the cries of people being tortured and killed. I saw men being taken out of the classroom where we were held, and I did not understand what was happening. I did not understand that just because I had a different name, that I was being placed in a position to be killed. And at that time, the only thing that I understood was fear. Fear of listening, fear of seeing, fear of speaking, fear of even sitting, of not knowing what the next moment would bring. And we mentioned at the beginning the media and articles. Well, when it comes to my hometown, The Guardian and Ed Vuliami, he actually wrote an article at the beginning of the war about the notorious concentration camps in my hometown. But it did not make a difference. The majority of the people that went through the concentration camps were killed, tortured, or raped. I lost my grandparents. My father lost his parents. We are still searching for the remains. We lost our uncles and a number of our relatives. Some of them have been identified, others have been not. But the journey of getting out of the concentration camp, it's a very heavy one and it's a very painful one. And although I have shared part of my story, I have never shared my whole story in detail. I have spent the past 2 decades helping survivors find their voice and have a platform to share their stories. But I have yet to find my own courage to go into details of how I survived. But what I can say is that for a survivor to go back to the darkest time in their lives, it's something that is the hardest to do. I remember that my family and I, we were separated in the concentration camp. I have 3 older sisters, and it just happened that my father and my 2 older sisters were taken out of the concentration camp earlier than my mother and I. And you mentioned your grandma telling your father her last words, go save yourselves. Well, my mother told me and my sister to hold on to her hands. And if there was any shooting, that we should hide behind her so that she's shot and that we're not. And those words were repeated on a daily basis. And I don't have a slideshow, but it takes 2.5 hours driving from my hometown to the nearby town in Croatia, Zagreb. But when we were taken out of the concentration camp, it took us 2.5 weeks to reach the safe area in Croatia. And we were handed from one group of soldiers, Serb soldiers, to another. And we were constantly being told that we were the lucky ones, that anyone that was not part of our group was killed so that we could survive. So at a very young age, I was told that I would either be killed or that I survived and someone else was killed. And this is something that changes a person, changes their perspective on life, and changes their overall feeling of safety. When we did arrive to safety, when we became refugees in Croatia, I did not feel safe. I remember asking my parents, can I have some water? Can I have some food? Can I sit here? It was a constant struggle of understanding that I could have anything and that I could exist in a space where I was at. And becoming a refugee is another fearful experience, especially when you just left a war zone, a concentration camp where you did not have anything to eat. And then you end up in a country where you don't understand the language and you don't understand what's happening. My family and I, we ended up in Germany, in eastern part of Germany, a town called Halle, and we were refugees there. And I remember trying to learn the language. The first year, we were not enrolled in the elementary school, but we were taught by teachers that were there for the refugee children. And one thing that I can say is that education has always been something that enabled me as a child to understand that I could learn and that I could exist. And unfortunately, when the war in Bosnia ended, we could not stay in Germany, but we could not go back to our hometown because our hometown was still in the part of Bosnia that was not free. The borders within Bosnia were not open at the time when the peace agreement was signed. So we ended up being refugees in the United States. And I'm mentioning my refugee journey more than my survival journey because it has enabled me to survive in every single aspect and understanding that I can say my name out loud and not be pushed to the side, that I will be safe and that my family will be safe. And it was not until we became refugees in the United States and I started school and I learned the language that I started understanding that what happened to me was not my fault. That we did not leave our home the way we did because I did something or my parents did something. And we watched our home burned down, our hometown completely demolished. I only have one photo of my childhood when I was 1 year old. And it just happened that that one photo was in the pocket of my dad's shirt. And that was not taken from us. All of my photos and all of my childhood has been after the war. Since the age of 8. And the reason I started understanding that it was not my fault, it was actually because of events such as this one. The first story that I heard about a child survivor was not from the war in Bosnia or the genocide in Srebrenica. It was actually a Holocaust survivor. It was a young woman who she was recorded. It was a recording of a woman who was my age. She was 7 years old when she survived Auschwitz. And that was the first time I felt a connection where my voice or my story can matter. And I was a teenager at that time. I was pre-teenager. I was 12 years old when I heard that story. And it was the first time when I started asking my parents questions. What happened? Why did it happen? The question of why, even to this day, is a very present one. Why were we the other? Why were we separated to be killed? And why did not my parents see this coming? And one of the reasons I asked them that at a very young age was that because if we look at how we inform the younger generations about the Holocaust, it is the promise of never again. And surviving a genocide and a war after the world said never again made me ask even more questions. And it is one of the reasons why at the age of 12, 13, and 14, I became active in the local community where I started explaining why we were refugees, because we ended up being refugees in Chicago. And Chicago is a very multi-ethnic city, very diverse, different communities from all over the world. And the first question is never, oh, you're a refugee from Bosnia. It's always more like, where is Bosnia? What happened to Bosnia? Your language is very different. So at a very young age, I had to explain that we survived a war and that we were refugees in the United States because we were not able to go back home. But it was really through education that I realized that I needed to reach out to other survivors, and that survivors are part of the process of educating others why it is important to remember. And if we look at what happened in Bosnia, and the lessons is that genocide does not happen overnight. It does not look at the status of the community or the family itself. It is a propaganda and a machinery of propaganda where neighbors are turned against each other. And in our case, our neighbors did turn against us. My father knew some of the guards at the concentration camp from elementary school, high school, from work, but he could not do anything to shelter us from experiencing such a trauma where to this day we are trying to find the words to describe what happened to us. And this is where I'm always become very emotional, because sometimes I feel like words are not enough to explain what happened. I can explain that we only had boiling water and some grains for 5 weeks, but I cannot explain what it did to us, how it affected me as a child, and how it took me years to start to eat chocolate, to start to eat some of the fruits and vegetables. It was a whole process of really regaining our lives back after we survived the war in Bosnia. But it was always through education, at least for me as a child, where I felt like I had a future. And it was through education and all the wonderful teachers that gave more than they could to really make sure that survivors such as myself understood that they have a place in this world and that they can make a difference, whether it is by sharing their story or working in different fields, helping other people. I did take the journey back to Bosnia. I took the steps back into 92, but it took me 2 years to go back to the concentration camp where we were held, because I just would break down just by coming closer to it or seeing the building that has been rebuilt again. And it is an elementary school, again, where children are being taught different histories and different narratives of what happened in Bosnia during the 90s. But it was also a way of me to really accept my past. And now, by being part of commemorations such as this one and working directly with survivors through Remembering Srebrenica, bringing people from around the world, but especially the UK, to Bosnia and to Srebrenica, where within a span of 5 days, over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were killed. We are trying to teach the lessons that the minute we start, as Martin said, dehumanizing a group of people, we might be next, or we will be next. And I think that my parents, after the Second World War, my father was born in 1984, they never imagined that something even remotely close to a concentration camp would happen again in Europe, not to mention that they would be survivors of a concentration camp. I don't have a number of on my body, but what happened in my hometown is that in the municipality of Prijedor, that after the majority of Bosnian Muslims or non-Serbs were taken to the concentration camps, the ones that were not taken yet, they were ordered to put a white armband on their arm and white sheets on their windows so that they were identified as the others. So there were too many similarities to the Second World War in the 90s, where they could have been prevented. And even when I look at what is happening today in the world, I cannot imagine another little girl or a child going through anything similar, knowing that in the next 10, 15, 20 to 30 years, they will be in my position, sharing parts of their stories, making sure that people understand that peace is very, very fragile and that we have to work on preserving peace and understanding that the consequences of war and genocide are long-term and generational, and that my grandparents did not survive in 92. So I'm also a grandchild survivor, a survivor myself, and I will be in a position where I will tell my children, they are very young right now, but I will be in a position where I will have to find the courage, the words to tell my children what happened to me in a way where I will teach them, hopefully I will teach them that my story needs to be a lesson for others to prevent these crimes from ever happening again, even though we know that they will happen again, but at least to send a message that we all have to work together in preserving peace and working towards lasting peace. Thank you.
Almina, thank you so much. Very powerful testimony there from you, and particularly in this 30th anniversary as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if Lorna is still on. Sorry, if Helen is still on. Maybe we can take a couple of questions because we have got a bit of time left. I didn't realise we had enough time to take some questions after those powerful testimonies. Helen, can I ask you, I suppose, what lessons from your experience, the experience of your father during the Holocaust, do you think are more important for young children today to learn and carry forward?
I think the story of resilience, story of the learning about, and Amina, listening to your story, sorry, just to go to Amina, just listening to your story and the things you were saying, just I could relate to that from what my dad was saying, so I was really connected with you on that as well. But just children need to understand, educate that everybody, a human is a person, and that everybody needs to be treated the same, equally, and looked after, and also take notes. And this is what Amina talked about, propaganda, and listening to what is being fed around you and questioning it. Stand up to it. Don't just accept what is being told you, but look for look for this. Look at the information that's coming, where it's coming through from. Is it secure? So just thinking. So young people need to really have an understanding of what's going on around them, what they can learn from what's going on around them, build up that resilience, and build up. And things don't always go well in life. We know that life is tough. That to learn to get the skills to be able to learn from them and move forward. And I think if everybody can listen to what happened to my father and to you, Alima, and your family, that they'll be able to, accept each other, tolerance and understanding.
Yeah, it's really important. Almina, what parallels do you think you can lead up? You look at the events leading up to the genocide in Bosnia. You look at today's rhetoric against either as Jews, Muslims, minority communities that we see across Europe and the United States, and the rise of Donald Trump's second term. What lessons can we learn from your experience?
I think that when and Helena just said, we need to be aware of what's happening around us and what's happening in the world and what impact it has directly on us, and how our actions impact not just our community, but the wider community. So when I had to re-educate myself about Yugoslavia and the fall of Yugoslavia. And when I read about how media was divided and where the signals of the media were coming from. So in my hometown, they were cut off pretty early on from Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, and all the media was coming from Belgrade, which at that time was the capital of Yugoslavia, but it was also Serbian controlled. The messages were very mixed. And when I look at social media today, before social media and when I was younger, I thought, if we had the tools, if we had the images, if we had our cameras available to take photos of what was happening to us, the world would react earlier. Well, today we know that the world does not react as fast as it should, even though we have all of the tools in our hands. We all have the phones. We can all see what is happening in different parts of the world. But I think what Helena just said, we need to understand the information that is coming at us. And just because it's not directly affecting us, our group of people that we belong to, that we need to understand that we as human beings are together in all of this and that it does affect us directly. So what happened in Bosnia did affect what happened in the region, and what happened in the Western Balkan region does affect what happens in Europe. So we do have the European Union that is very much involved in Bosnia today, you know, making sure that the peace agreement is in place, that peace prevails in Bosnia. So it's all interconnected, and we need to understand that interconnectedness.
Yeah, thank you, Almina. Martin Kavanagh is here, our national president. Martin, a question probably for you is, how can we support members who are feeling marginalised at the moment because of rhetoric from politicians like Nigel Farage and Donald Trump and others on the far right? And how can we challenge that in the workplace and with wider society?
Yeah, cheers, Mohammed. Can I just start off by saying to both Helen and Almina what absolutely incredible bravery that you've shown tonight to give us those stories. Helen, you through your father, and Almina through your own personal circumstances. And it really does humble me to listen to such heartbreaking stories and the real terror and hardship that is that humans, you know, put on other human beings. And really, Mohammed, that brings to your question, doesn't it? Because if we can learn anything from what we've heard tonight, but also from what we've read through history and seen through history, is that we have to get the message across, I would say, for PCS, starting with our own members, maybe even with our friends and families, you know, in our communities, that actually the second, and I mean the second, that you start allowing it to become the norm to scapegoat and marginalize anyone from whatever group of society that we live in or come from, you set the parameters for which this hatred can spread and grow and build. And what we've tried to do, as you know, Mohammed, through the brilliant work that you and comrades in the National Black Members Committee have been doing, but also through our quality department and working with people like Elmina and Helen and others, is that we've really been trying to get the message out there to our members that there is a better world. There is actually a different thing that we can achieve. There is a different narrative that we can get out there. And I think arming our members and arming our reps and activists with facts, yes, detail, yes, but more importantly, I think the courage and the tools to actually have not aggressive or confrontational discussions in the workplace, but actually calm, rational discussions about the absurdity of how human beings treat each other and what the devastating impact that can ultimately have. It is really what we've got to try and do. So how do we do that? That we do that by starting by education. We do that by starting having organised meetings. We get groups of members together and we have a dialogue. We have a dialogue about what we absolutely have to learn from, you know, from everything we've heard tonight and say throughout history. Because let's face it, we have so much to learn from throughout history, and we repeat the same mistake, and different countries and different communities repeat the same mistake time and time and time again. And that's so saddening, isn't it? It's so saddening. Sometimes you think to yourself, how have we got here? How have we allowed ourselves to get here again? And as Melmina just said in their contribution then, we only have to look at the events of the last 2 years where it's literally in your face every single day of the week through social media and through media channels, and the world doesn't react quick enough. Well, actually, I think it can start in the workplace, it can start in our homes, it can start in our communities by having those just dialogues, Mohammed, and they can't come quick enough. They have to start now, and they have to continue.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Martin. We're coming to the end of our time. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined us, particularly to you, Helen and Almina, for those powerful testimony. And it's an indication of PCS's commitment under your leadership, Martin, and Fran, our General Secretary's ongoing commitment to equality and tackling underrepresentation, giving voice to all parts and all communities. I'm proud to have put this together along with my Vice Chair, Tracy Hilton, the Equality Department, and particularly Ramona who makes us all look good on camera. I don't know how she does it, but we do look amazingly good. So thank you so much, everyone. As always, if you want to get in touch with the National Black Members Committee, please drop us an email to equality@pcs.org.uk. But thank you so much. And if you've learned something from tonight, if you've been moved by something that you've heard from Helen or Elmina, don't just digest it, pass it on. Pass it on to your children, to your grandchildren, to your neighbours, to your friends, so that what you've learnt tonight can live on in the generations to come. From me, Mohammed Shafiq, Chair of the National Black Members Committee, and everybody here, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you very, very soon. Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you.